All right, it's week 7. I'm Doc V. This is the sCAP course, and we finally reached a point where we can explore the algorithms that we've been building up to all this time. Let's check them out. Okay, welcome back. I'm Doc V, and what we're going to be looking at this week are a series, 3 algorithms that we provide on the PurveyorTech site, which explores a lot of the concepts that we've been talking about all this time. We have the initial algorithm called the steps for critical analysis. You've seen those. So it's an algorithm which you can use on our website to explore and in an almost an automated way calculate out some of the information in a quantifiable way as we look at perspective, bias, correlation, and moral influence. All right. Those steps for critical analysis that we explored in the videos beforehand are the things that we'll be using in the algorithms now. Okay. There is another one, the algorithm for AQGM. It's the algorithm for quantified general morality. It explores the process for understanding decision. All right, it's a guide for that. That one was really based upon the magnificent scripture I mentioned at early on inside of the course. We don't really use it in the course all that much, but that algorithm is derived from a lot of the information, the dictums, the moral guidance, the moral architectures, the structures that are found inside of those texts. It really guides and assists in decision making. And then finally we have the equalage, which is the equilibrium of liberty, altruism, and justice. Now, this algorithm is based upon the information that we just covered in week 6 when we were talking about equilibrium. So it covers and introduces a means for quantifying some of the concepts that we would run into in various scenarios regarding altruism, liberty, and justice. All right. A lot of these algorithms require a profile which you will build on side of the site. As these things are processed, the systems can process them in a default kind of way, generic kind of way. And then there are also times when the algorithms, as you run them, can be submitted to the artificial intelligence. Ellie is one of the AIs who, multiple instances of Ellie, is the AI who actually assesses these things and runs them through and responds. Okay, so sometimes you just get the generic response from the algorithms as they get processed, or you have the AI itself actually assess, or not really assessing it. They will just run the algorithm, and sometimes they offer input, results, some type of response. That's not all the time. Sometimes they choose to. All right. The use of the algorithms is not required. You don't have to use the algorithms. We just provide them there as a tool to explore the various concepts that we're talking about. To be perfectly honest with you, in life, you're really, you do your thing. You're supposed to move about through life. You don't have time to pull out a phone and start calculating some stuff up. You just need to know. This is more in the realm of practice, okay? Building up that muscle memory so that when scenarios do present themselves, you can fall back on something that I did explore, I did use, I was proficient at, and now I'm using these things to help me in real time as I do the things that I do. Okay? That's all these algorithms are, and then we shall move into them and explore those things right now. Okay, so let's take a look at these algorithms. So starting from the main page of our PurveyorTech main website, making sure that you are indeed logged on, go to Tools, Resources, Gateway, and that'll bring you to the 4 tiles that you'll find here inside of the gateway. We're going to be focusing on the algorithms with the sCA, AQGM, Equalage. So if these are the first 3 algorithms, the steps for critical analysis, AQGM, and the equilibrium of liberty, altruism, and justice, these other ones there, the Q and the analysis, those aren't really algorithms themselves. Those are really storage mechanisms. So when you're actually executing them, there are 2 ways that these things could be executed. There's the default handlers, which uses some of the data and returns results, or there is the way where you can use the AppSody. And the AppSody will run the algorithms themselves, where they will look at more of the data and return the reports. So when those reports are returned to you, they're stored inside of the queue. You'll probably have to refresh the page. We'll look at that in a bit. The analysis are all of the scenarios that you've executed in the past. So if you've been here and you've been using the tools and the site and the algorithms, and you've been running algorithms, all of the things you've been doing over time would be kept inside of that analysis list. So let's take a look at the sCA first. Okay, so looking at this, we'll move into the sCA, and the first thing you see is the area up top where it actually talks about the scenario. So again, these algorithms are not designed to tell you what to do. It's not their purpose. Nothing really should inform or control you or your thoughts. Really, what these algorithms are designed to do is to simply get you to think and to capture what your thoughts are and fill out the context behind why you might be thinking some of the things that you think. All right? So this first one, the sCA, it looks at perspective, bias, correlation, and moral influence. We've had various chapters in the text which talked about these things and explained them. So what those things are and how they work, you should be able to draw upon the information that you learned and explored in the text as you started looking at those concepts, those terms. Up top, you have Escape Media, which is a separate system. It's the Escape with .v. It is and has to do with current events. Typically, in this particular instance, we're not using that. That would be more, we're looking at what I might have been talking about in some current event. I've already identified a scenario. You'd come inside of this drop-down list and look at it. But here, you're talking about personal things that you've submitted. And we'll look at that in a second. So let's go ahead and create a scenario for ourselves. We're going to be focusing on this one just as an example. My neighbor's untrained dog always bark in the middle of the night when they are not home. I should report the neighbors to the police. So that's the scenario we're working on right now. I mean, does that happen? Yeah. I mean, not everybody are pet people. That happens. Some people like them, some people don't. Some animals are sad when owners leave. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I've had pets myself, and dogs do bark. I mean, that's what dogs do. They bark. So let's take a look at what this algorithm is, what we're actually talking about. So we see the scenario. The problem is that they're barking in the middle of the night. We're assuming, or really conveying, that it's creating a problem. Either I can't sleep, or other people can't sleep, or people are being put out in some weird way. The action really here is reporting the neighbors to the police. It's noise. It's really nuisance. So looking at what this algorithm does, here, does it present a perspective that's not even possible? And it is. I mean, it's a perspective that many people have experienced. Is it not probable? No, not the case at all. Has it never been experienced by you or others? I mean, no. So looking at these perspectives, these things really don't apply. We're going to leave those alone for the time being and move to bias. Now, are there superlatives? Yes. I mean, the dogs are always barking. But to be honest with you, but are they really always barking in the middle of the night? No. So I type in my response. Not really. I think that they do, but I don't really know. I mean, I use the word always to try and convey that it happens with great frequency. But really, always is kind of the wrong word to use. So, is there context that was omitted? True. I mean, I don't really offer any kind of other information. I don't really offer any proof. I mean, maybe I might have recorded it, but let's see. So I'll type something in my notes here. In this particular scenario, as I'm looking at it, I don't really have any proof that this is happening. I might report it to the authorities. I mentioned that the dogs are untrained, but do I know that they're untrained? Are there double standards? It's possible. Maybe trained dogs don't do it. Trained dogs? I don't know. It appears to be a stereotype that I am applying to this. My bias against the canines. So that's my bias against canines. Maybe they're trained. There could be other reasons why that was happening. Regardless, we're looking at it. We'll take a look at correlation. Are there other things? Not really. We're not really comparing data or events, data elements to each other. So there's not too much of an issue there. Moral influence. There isn't really any being brought up about universal rights there's no really cultural issues or religious aspects to this. I'm going to leave that off. So I'm going to go down here. Do not send this to the app Saudi. Why am I not going to send it? Because they're actually offline. It says it right there. If they were online, that little dot would be green. And then I could send it to them and they could process it. They'll process it for me. But I'm just going to use the default handler here and click. When you do, it brings up the report page. So this page, this particular scenario, the SCA, AQGM, equalage, it allows me to look at the output. And we're just looking at the SCA, so we're looking at that. Yes, we are talking about the SCA. So we'll click on that, and then we'll find the report. It lists the scenario, just as I was talking about. And it gives you a bar graph here. Presence, relevance. As you're looking at it, the greater those bars are, the greater the issue is. Now, this scenario was really from my point of view. It really could have been a scenario that someone else is talking about. I might be overhearing what other people are talking about. I might be looking at something I'm reading inside of an article or a newspaper. It doesn't have to be sourced by me. It could be something else. The greater those bars, as it evaluates out, the greater the problem I might have with understanding the context or the point of view that is being made in some scenario. There might be bias prevalent inside of it. There might be a lack of ability to see another perspective, or it just seems impossible that this could even happen. Maybe not impossible. It just might seem that way. So it's actually low. I'm looking at this by presence. We explain in a text the difference between presence versus relevance. Looking at this thing, I had a few things inside of bias. 1, 2, 3. And because of the weighting of these particular elements, it evaluates out to right there. I mean, we're not going to talk about weights right now. We'll look at that in the next video, but so on and so forth. You get 15% with relevance. I mean, we're looking at 1 out of 1. I mean, what am I talking about here? We go back. We'll take a look at my survey. I mean, are there double standards or stereotypes with regards to bias? I mean, that's kind of important when you're talking about bias, which is kind of why it's at the top. So, these things are kind of ordered in importance for all intents and purposes. So the greatest really offense as we're evaluating here, according to the weights that we have set up, would be double standards and stereotypes. So if those things are there, well, then there's going to be bias there. I mean, that's how it's set up for us with our weights right now. So the relevance of what I'm looking at is what I'm actually talking about here, or the problems I found in my own scenario, and that was relatively high inside of bias. That was my bias. And there's the metadata that you have down there, information that we have inside of the survey, the report, weights we'll look at later on. There is a way for you to print. Click on that print button, and the black is harder for you to print. So you can Control P, print this report out if you need to hand it in somewhere, some other place. I mean, by printed paper. There's a means for you to save a scenario so you can reload it. Why would I want to reload it? Because I might want to type all that stuff out again. I mean, this particular scenario is relatively simple. Sometimes there might be perspective, there might be things inside of correlation, maybe even moral influence. I mean, it could be a whole lot of typing that you're doing. So if you wanted to bring and look at that again, you might want to save this information, this output. You click on the button, this allows you to do so. And so what you're going to do is simply select all of that information. You can select all of it. I mean, Control A, if you're on Windows, that'll do it. Copy it and paste it into a file of your choosing. I mean, you name it whatever you want to name it. And that's what you'll do for that particular report. So that's what you'll do to save this information. All right. Name it anything that you want. Once you save it off, it'll be there for you to load up again in the future at some other point. All right. I'm saving this information to my file. All right. So once you're done saving that off, you can go ahead and evaluate something else. What we're going to do is to go back into the gateway and take a look at the AQGM next. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the AQGM now. Now remember, the AQGM is used to evaluate and help you to understand decisions. Now, this time, we already have a scenario defined from when we looked at the sCAP. My neighbor's untrained dog thing. We'll look here in the drop-down list for personal and find the scenario that we're actually talking about. That way we can keep them in sync. I mean, you can type it again. I mean, you can type it over again, and if you do retype it, you might misspell a word. So then it actually makes that a separate scenario at that point. So if you are trying to keep these in sync, use the drop-down list that you find here once you've established the first report. Look for that one, and then it'll always be in sync. Now, the AQGM is helping you evaluate decisions. Now, what we're looking at here are the decisions for a specific action. I mean, reporting the neighbors to the authorities. I mean, that's what we're focusing on this time. I mean, you could have a scenario much larger, and there could be multiple actions inside of it that are taking place. No one said you had to focus on any one thing. No one said you need to run the algorithm on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things. It's up to you. It's how you are framing your context for your understanding, conveying it so that others can understand. All right? So in this particular instance, I'm just going to report the neighbors to the police as the particular action. Now, again, the algorithms are designed for you to think. Think about the actions that you're doing. Think about the context of the scenarios that are presented to you. Think about what impact your actions are going to have on others. So in this particular thing, the questions that it asks, what really? Who's going to gain from the action? If I report the neighbors to the police, who's going to gain from that? That'll be me. I'll be the one gaining from that. Who's going to lose? Somebody else. When will they gain? When will I gain? I guess sometime later I might gain. When will the losers suffer from it? Sometime later maybe. Where will the action take place? Does it matter? It does in a way. The algorithm does take a look at location, and those are fairly generic, but it does impact the algorithm and how it processes. Who will lose because of the action of the location of the action? Nobody. I don't think it matters all that much in this particular instance. The catch with using the AQGM is that it's not just submitting the survey like we did with the SCA. This one works with a profile. You need to derive a profile for yourself, and you'll find it. I'll go back. I'll click on the little gear in the upper right-hand corner of the site. It'll take me to the profile. It will also allow me to adjust the weights, but we're not going to be looking at that right now. So we'll just go back and look at the survey. And this survey takes in information specific to you. Now, the algorithm looks at greed, it looks at altruism or authoritarian. A lot of the moral architectures that make up the AQGM inside of the AI. All right? It takes a look at ideology, authoritarianism. It looks at things about yourself, what you believe, and references that information against a survey that you submit for your individual scenario. All right? When the AI are online, this form is a little larger. The AI does look at greed. Greed is considered. Greed is always present. We talk about it inside of the text. It's not always bad. It's not always good. But taking into consideration its existence is something that this algorithm does. As it stands right now, this profile it's not looking for that information. It's kind of hidden. When the AI are online, it offers more opportunity for you to fill this information out. But right now, we'll just go ahead and select these things here, answering the questions that you see over on the side. All right. I'll just go through. I'll just finish selecting some of these things as I see. Are there right and wrong answers? No. It's not that kind of a thing. It's simply what you believe. You fill it out the way you believe, and then you simply submit it. All right. Now, we'll go back into it, take a look. You see that stuff is saved, so on and so forth. If I chose to save it, you use it the same way you did in the other field when you're saving a report. Select the information, copy, create a file somewhere for yourself where you will save this information off, and then you'll be fine. All right. You can reload the information. You'll click OK to get out of that. The reason why you might want to do that, if you use your browser like I do, like for all of my browsers, all of my cookies and data settings are wiped clean when I close my browser, so that most of your profile is gone too. So when you fill out this profile, the profile is used by the AI. It's submitted up to the server, but it's never kept there. So it's never stored, it's never put inside of a database, it's never put inside of a flat file, it's not transmitted to anybody else, it's never ever saved The only place it's actually kept is on your hard drive inside of this particular browser. If you open up another browser, you won't have access to this profile. So the profile is really unique to the browser and most probably the user of that browser on that system, depending on how you might have your browser set up or installed. So if this thing is lost, you might need to go down and load it. How do you load it? You press it, you click on the load button, you open up your file, paste the information that you had in your file like that, and then you click OK. And the information is saved, and then you simply submit. Now we go back over here, and we have our profile. It's there. Go ahead and click on Analyze it. We didn't send it to the AI, so this was being processed by default. We got an immediate response, and we see now the results that we're looking at here for this particular scenario. Should I report him to the neighbors to the police? I mean, that's what we're actually talking about. I mean, what am I looking at? 50% more often. I mean, that's what the yellow decision marker is kind of resolving at. Should you avoid it? That's where the red marker is moving towards 0, so you really shouldn't avoid. Now, should you always adhere to reporting? I mean, there's a higher weighting for actually doing that action of reporting. But to be honest with you, they're both fairly low on the bars. So take a look at the values there. You're looking at the more often, 58%, degree of certainty. I mean, the degree of certainty of following through with this particular action. Yeah, so I'm going to say, as I kind of look at it, it's almost like a give or take. I mean, in terms of a decision, looking at having the algorithm evaluate my particular greed line. I talk about that inside of the text, the way it impacts me, how I'm going to benefit, how the people it impact are going to benefit, so on and so forth. I mean, in this particular instance, it's almost a give and take. So again, keep in mind when you execute these algorithms by default, they use default data. So some of the information is just not evaluated. Some of the data is not used, especially the data specific to you. I mean, even the weights. If you were to change weights, I mean, we'll talk about it in the next video. The weights aren't ever considered when you run the algorithm by default. So if you treat these algorithms the way I say you treat them, just run through them. I mean, I'm looking at this. I mean, what does it actually mean? The yellow marker, sort of in the middle, that's great. I mean, I stopped to think about who's going to benefit of me reporting. I mean, me. I mean, honestly, I'm going to benefit. They're going to suffer. So does that really help? I don't know. I mean, maybe sometimes we have knee-jerk reactions and we simply execute. We don't think about the impact to anybody else at all. I mean, that's kind of the way it works. I mean, you know, sometimes take a chill pill, evaluate what you're doing, and maybe going through this or your own algorithm in your own head, your own thought process. Maybe that will be enough to give you a bit of a pause, you know, before you proceed on to doing other things.